the mediums for continuing scholarship in philosophical history for decades now. And Jim, of course, is an expert in Sanskrit as well, and this reflects the title of his paper, Theosophy's Sanskrit Revival. So, Jim, the word is yours.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. I do want to thank all the speakers. I've listened to them very carefully, learned a lot, and I'm very happy that this conference has been conducted. It shows me that there's quite a bit of research going on around the world. The paper that I am giving today is on a topic that has been touched on by past speakers, especially Dr. Strub and also, I think, Dr. Bayer as well. So let me just get into it. I'll give you a very quick overview of it. And I'm not sure if I can get into the PowerPoint. If not, I'll try to explain it. Let's see, Erica, could you?
PowerPoint, you will see there is a green button on Zoom.
Okay, so I'm hitting that.
Click share screen. And then just click share again.
Okay.
In the window you see popping up. If you click the green button, share screen, it will pop up a window. Then
okay, so not doing it. So if I don't want to waste too much time on this, let's see.
Yeah, if you press the green button, you should see a kind of a window of all the windows you have open on your laptop. And there you should be able to see your PowerPoint and just click that. But you have to open your PowerPoint first. Open your PowerPoint outside. And then
It is not, yeah, it's on. I have it on my screen, but I can't get it on the.
you have to go to Zoom.
Okay, let's
Let's try just now. Go to Zoom. Can you see Zoom in front of you right now?
Yes, I have that.
Yes. Click the green button below. You will see in the middle center a green button. If you have to pass the mouse over.
It's not, yes, I have it here. I'm pressing it. It doesn't work.
If you press share, it will pop up a window. The window may have popped up already. Can you see anything there? No.
No, there's nothing there. So I'm going to just pass up on it. If you don't mind, what I will do is try to, let me see if I can get out of this. And I'm very sorry for this. I'm not too proficient on this. Okay. What I'm going to do is just give you some highlights since we do not have too much time. And I want to start out with just a general introduction. Of course, the position of Sanskrit is all important in the Theosophical Society. It is based upon its content, which is the wisdom religion according to Theosophical teaching. However, there have been other revivals. Those revivals include the British attempt to interest the British Empire with Sanskrit, mainly because of their legal documents. The Germans were interested in Sanskrit because of their Ur poetry of India. An example being Franz Bopp in The Origins of Language and Sanskrit's relationship with its fellow Indo-European languages. Going back to Theosophy, however, the wisdom religion is based upon contents within a number of different languages, including the Hebrew, Egyptian, Persian or Avestan, and of course Sanskrit languages. According to Blavatsky, at the very beginning of her investigations, she said that this wisdom religion was discoverable in the old pre-Vedic religion, which concerns me a little bit because that seems to be dealt with in a different manner later on in the history of the Theosophical Society. This pre-Vedic religion is the equivalent to esoteric Buddhism, which has been already discussed. Esoteric Buddhism is not an invention of Sinet. It was, of course, in Isis Unveiled, and it was used by Blavatsky at all times from the very beginning of the society. But what is most important, I think, with Sanskrit over and above the other languages is a number of things. It is considered a direct descendant of Senzar, which is the ancient language. And it is a language that exceeds all other languages, according to Blavatsky, in the contents of the secret wisdom. So its importance gradually becomes all important because of the contents in quantity as well as in quality. And this, of course, is strengthened with the idea that the leaders of the Theosophical Society came into contact with an Indian by the name of Dayananda Saraswati, who represented the wisdom that we call the wisdom religion, but should be perhaps be considered the Vedic religion. So in other words, there's a clue that I found here that pre-Vedic and Vedic sometimes interact and sometimes contrast in the explanation of what the wisdom religion is. That's something that I wanted to consider a little more. The reason why Sanskrit became all important, of course, was through Saraswati. It was this sustained exposure to Indian pundits, and eventually, of course, the move to India that led the idea that Sanskrit was, of all the languages, the most important and not just one of many. So that, I think, is very important to keep in mind, that this prominence is very much there from the very beginnings of the Theosophical sojourn in India. Now, outside the Theosophical sphere, Indian scholars do place quite a bit of importance on the Sanskrit language. And one reason for that is because of the general content of philosophy and religion. Indian culture is encapsulated within the Sanskrit language, more so than any other language of India. So as a result, they were always retained in importance, even though it had its ups and downs. Nowadays, for instance, Sanskrit, even though there are only about 24,000 native speakers of the language, it has become the second official language of the two states, new states, Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. So it's interesting that Uttarakhand is the site of many important Hindu sites, and so it's called the land of the gods, which is very fitting because Sanskrit itself is called the language of the gods. But what is generally not known is this particular expression, language of the gods, actually is fairly late. It comes from Dundan's Kavyadarsha, and it really states in the original that this is the divine language, which is perfected. And of course, Sanskrit means the perfected language. And so this divine language is, of course, was uttered by the great sages. Now, the revival itself, even though so much emphasis is placed on Blavatsky, I do want to give emphasis also to Henry Olcott, because he was the motivating force behind the Theosophical Society and its efforts to revive Sanskrit in India and to increase its interest and to introduce the language in the West. And the reason for that was because of the importance of Swami Dayananda, who was considered to be the living exemplar of the Vedic religion. And of course, according to Dayananda, the Vedic religion was the all-important religion. There was no such thing as a pre-Vedic religion. They got along very well for a very short time until it was discovered that Dayananda was an advocate of a personal God. And that you can get, by the way, in his commentaries, of which Dayananda emphasizes quite a bit about the personality of God in his Rigvedadibhashya Bhumika, which is his commentary on the Vedas. And by the way, Dayananda was very limited in his notion of what Veda meant. It only meant the four Samhitas, or the Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and the Atharva Veda, nothing else. The Brahmanas were not included, nor were the Upanishads for that matter. So that was the extent of Dayananda, who was in fact for a very short time recognized as perhaps a living master, was very much looked up upon by Henry Olcott. And it was Olcott, by the way, in his February 1878 letter, his initial letter to Dayananda, who said that this was a means of gaining brotherhood or realizing brotherhood. So the question arises about the brotherhood of humanity is, where exactly did it come from? Brotherhood is mentioned, by the way, in Isis. And of course, it existed well before that in other areas, but it was Olcott who really pushed it, in my opinion. And he pushed it because of his contacts with the Indian scholars and with Dayananda. So that those were the three individuals who were important. Blavatsky giving us the sources of the wisdom religion, Dayananda serving as the living exemplar, and Olcott actually serving as the motivating force behind the theosophical efforts. Now, with Blavatsky, I have a couple of things to say, is that even though there's so much emphasis on Sanskrit in India and the East, there's no indication of this in her early article, A Few Questions to Hirov. And I might mention that the article on which this is based, Rosicrucianism, which was written by Hirov, was published in Theosophical History, by the way. If you read that in context with the questions of Hirov, we're finding that this is more reminiscent of Western esotericism, or at least Western occult teachings, rather than India. So the question is, we have to emphasize, I think, the notion that Blavatsky did not come into this teaching full blown, but she learned along the way. And you can kind of trace the way she has developed her teachings, becoming more and more familiar with India, and so incorporating more of the ideas of Indian philosophy into the theosophical teaching. But at the very beginning, I find very little evidence that it was there, although she talks a lot about it in Isis, but it's not the type of Indian philosophy that I would consider to be informed. Now, with regard to, as I say, Saraswati, by definition, according to his commentary, he said the Vedas only referred to the mantra portion of the text. That would refer to the hymns, not so much the commentary or the Brahmana portion. And his issue with the Theosophical Society was that he was a believer in the personal God. Of course, Olcott advocated the impersonal God when he defended the society against Saraswati. With regard to Olcott, the question arises, where did he get his interest and love of India? Perhaps we could set up some dates for that. 1870, for instance, when he first met Mulji Thakkar and Tulsidas. And then, of course, his meeting in 1877 with Thakkar, who introduced him to Chintaman, Harichand Chintaman. Then comes his first letter to Swami Dayananda of February 18th, 1878. Right after that, May 3rd, comes the circular of the Theosophical Society, in which brotherhood of humanity is introduced for the first time as an object of the society. And this continues on. Again, he includes a number of other incidents of which he becomes very much interested and excited about going to India. Now, with regard to the actual revival itself, the term Sanskrit revival is not used until 1882, of course. It was something that was there at the very beginning. Olcott mentioned it in his 1878 letter. So the question is, when was the first manifestation of this particular revival? And it has to be with the Theosophist, the journal. So in October 1879, we find that a number of articles appears from the #1 issue right on down to the 1890s and beyond, of which a number of articles written by pundits and by well-known individuals that are listed and sometimes not listed as authors appears in the Theosophist itself. But in Blavatsky's introduction of the journal to the public, she says in her Namaste that priests and pundits were the only competent interpreters of Indian teaching. And so this was a means of communicating the sublimity of Aryan, Buddhist, Parsi, and other religions. And I must say that Sanskrit was not the only religion, of course, or language that was emphasized. There were other languages and cultures as well, especially Zoroastrianism. Now, some of the examples, there are many. I just took down some samples. Aryan trigonometry by, this is Dinanath Dalvi, the Veda, the origin and history of religion. This is by Panduran Pandit, the antiquity and sanctity of the Sanskritic religion by Pandit Pranath. There are many, many pundits, by the way, who did publish in the Theosophists, and not much is known about them, although I would like to know a little bit more about some of these individuals. One of the most important individuals who published in the Theosophists was, in fact, Ganganatha Jha, who is one of the great Hindu scholars of the 19th century and 20th century. Now, besides the publication of these articles, we do find that other activities are going on. And by July 1882, in the supplement to the Theosophists, there was an announcement, by the way, of the revival of Sanskrit, which was in fact something that put a label on all of the activities that were going on since 1879. Now, with these additional activities, taking place, we find that many reflect the idea that one of the three objects of the society would have been emphasized. And so I would think that around 1880 or so, there is this second object of the society. And by the way, I'm reading according to the definition of these objects, according to the time that they were composed. So 1880 or so, it reads, second object, the study of Aryan and other Eastern literatures, religions, philosophies, and sciences. And so the idea behind this second second object, was to arouse education of the Indian population. So this led to the construction of many schools, Sanskrit schools, for instance. The last number that I saw was something like 27 of them were built. To promote the spread of kindly and tolerant feelings between man and man, that would reflect, of course, the brotherhood of humanity, and to investigate unexplained laws of nature and psychic powers of man. So very often, of course, the third object, this investigating the unexplained laws of nature, was something that was not as popular in later theosophical activities, but it was there. And the study of Sanskrit was important for that matter as well. Now, generally speaking, the revival encompassed translation activity, publishing, and instruction. Building also was taking place of schools, as I just mentioned, and libraries, including the Adyar Oriental Library in 1886. The work of the lodges in India were very important. The Madras Theosophical Society, Moradabad Theosophical Society, and Nellore Theosophical Society all had Sanskrit schools, and they were flourishing quite well. The Adyar Library itself is the crown jewel of all of this. And as I remember Michael Gomes mentioning all of the palm leaf manuscripts, there are something like 17,000 or over 17,000 manuscripts as of 1969, the last figure that I saw. In 1901, it was only 4,000 in comparison. In 1890, something like just a few hundred. But there were also other books on Sanskrit. There were 162 volumes, for instance, in 1890 of the Vedas, the Vedangas, and also the commentaries, as well as Itihasas and Puranas. So all of this activity was going on and is still going on at your library. So this is something that's most important. The other great publication is the Bombay Theosophical Publications Fund, which was founded by Tukaram Tatya. And there are many, many important translations of those. I only cite two examples here: the 12 Principal Upanishads, translated by Edward Rohr and Rajendra Lala Mitra, and also the Jivanmukta Viveka, or the Path of Purification, in the life of Madhva. Now, moving on to the United States very briefly, there was a organization that was founded in 1894, the Niger Dharma Sabha. This is one of those many organizations that were founded just on the drop of a hat. This was founded in 1894, which led to the foundation of the American Asiatic and Sanskritic Revival Society, which was founded a few months later, November 17th, 1894. And the aim was to help it, the Theosophical Society, and to further extend the influence which the Oriental Department of the American section has begun to wield. And this this Oriental department, by the way, was founded in 1891 by Judge. And so here is a early picture of W.Q. Judge, a little bit different from what you usually see. But one of the functions of this society was to include articles and translations related to Eastern religions, philosophies, literature, and folklore, et cetera, and in many different languages. Two pundits were hired. The first one was Manolal Dwivedi, who was the pundit there to teach Sanskrit to the Americans until he left around 1896 or 7. He was succeeded by Charles Johnston, and Johnston becomes a very important figure after that. Now, one thing that I should mention, and I have to credit Jerry Hepke-Akins for telling me this many, many years ago, but I followed it up and it's true. I confirmed this. In 1894 or thereabouts, but it could have occurred even earlier in 1890 with the first edition, the Funk and Ragnall's Dictionary. This is the standard dictionary of the English language, originally published in 1890, had an editorial board. On that board was William Q. Judge. And for the first time that I can gather, Sanskrit words were included in an English dictionary. Some of those entries included karma, karmic, brahm, or brahma, or actually brahma with a long A, brahma kalpa, and atman, and sannyasa. Those are some of the words that appear. So officially, Sanskrit words now come into the language. And then finally, there were attempts in America to teach Sanskrit, and Charles Johnston was the one who was responsible for that. And Johnston himself was responsible for translating quite a few works, classic works, including the Upanishads, the Vedanta philosophy of Shankaracharya, the Bhagavad Gita, the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole website of all of his works, which must number in the hundreds. So that is where I ended. I don't know how much time I have, but let me just mention a couple of items that I did not intend to speak about. This will all be published later on. There were other very important introductions, such as, and works, such as the Vachaspatyam, or the Sanskrit dictionary, which was composed by Taranath Tarka Vachaspati. And that was a very important work, and still is, in fact. He died in 1885, so he was an earlier author of this work. In fact, Olcott, because of all of his work and of helping these people, actually received the Brahmanical sacred thread from Taranath. So that's an interesting thing. Another point, the publication later on of Brahma Vidya, the Adyar Library Bulletin, continues this work of the Sanskrit revival, as well as a number of activities in America, beginning with Tingley's Society, and especially with her successor, De Peruca, Gottfried De Peruca. So he was the one who really emphasized Sanskrit more so than anybody else. Judith Heiberg, an individual who, when I first came to California, she was very much involved around 1970 or so with a East-West schools. She having left the society back around the early 40s, when the split occurred in 1946 with the Covina or Point Loma group. I should mention one last thing, though. The Mergenthaler linotype that the Theosophical University Press has at today Pasadena, at that time Point Loma, was in fact operated by Jeffrey Barborka. And it was this linotype press that included for the first time in the United States the Devanagari characters. And so now was for the first time that we're able to actually publish texts in Devanagari. So again, the Sanskrit revival continues in one way or another in Adyar, in my opinion, with the Adyar Library. It ended, however, around 1946 with the Covina Society ending all of this activity under Colonel Conger. So that is essentially the extent of what I wanted to present to you today. It is something that I believe was a very important activity on the part of the Theosophical Society. When people are introduced to Sanskrit, more likely than not, they probably were introduced via a theosophical connection. And that's something that I think the Society could be proud of. So with that, I think I'll end it there and open it to questions if we have some time.
Thank you very much, Jim, for this very detailed paper, which really outlines how influential I think the Theosophical movement has been in Sanskrit revival. I mean, it has definitely been instrumental in translation and in producing printing presses and making this kind of understanding of Sanskrit possible in the West, so to speak. So the floor is open, as Jim said, for questions and comments. So please raise your hand or write in the chat if you have something for James. Maybe there's one from Igor here. Hi, James, congratulations, brilliant. Could you please say the name of the dictionary where Judge first put Sanskrit terms? And could you please repeat the grammatical thread?
We call it simply the Funk, F-U-N-K, Wagnall's Dictionary, W-A-G-N-A-L-L-S. It's the full title, however, is the Standard Dictionary of the English Language. And it was first published 1890, but I was using the 1894 edition where all the Sanskrit terms did appear.
Thank you, Jim.
So it's about the size of, we might, probably the third edition of Webster's dictionary. It's a fairly thick, and it's a very important dictionary because of the editorial board. Bjerregaard, by the way, was included on that editorial board. He was one of the members of the American Society, later on the Hargrave Society.
Thank you, Jim. We have a comment from Erica as well.
Hi. Thanks for your lecture. Are you aware of Blavatsky's criticism to Monier Williams?
Am I aware of Monier Williams? Could you repeat, please?
Criticism, Blavatsky criticized Monier Williams. Sorry,
I think the audio was breaking up somewhat, but yeah. I think Erica's question was whether you could say something about Blavatsky's criticism of Monier Williams's Sanskrit dictionary.
Oh, I read it many, many years ago, and I forgot. I don't know exactly what the exact criticism of it was. She did criticize, well, she criticized everybody. Of course, Muller and Monier Williams, but I don't recall exactly what the gist of that criticism was. I'm sorry to say I can't answer your question.
Thank you.
So do we have any other comments or questions? The floor is open. Jim, as far as I remember, wasn't there a Judith Tyburg from Point Loma as well, who was kind of instrumental in also reviving?
Yes, I mentioned Judith Heiberg. Maybe you missed it, but Judith Tyburg was in fact a student at the Theosophical University. She was a pupil of the Perukar. She learned Sanskrit from him. And she went on to teach Sanskrit, of course, at the university. And she was a very important figure in the early society up until the early 1940s. But then she became associated with the individuals who were opposed to Colonel Conger and his claims. And as a result, she left the society and became independent from about 1946 onwards. When I came to California, this was in 1970, she was already advertising in the LA Times and elsewhere of this new institute called the East-West Institute. And she was more or less in charge of it. I think she was the teacher and administrator, everything that was it. So that, I think, was the extent. She was involved with the East-West Institute until her death. And I think she died sometime in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But her, by the way, her picture is on one of the covers of Theosophical History, teaching the children at Point Loma when she was a young girl, not about 20 or so. And this would have been around the, probably the late teens, early 20s, I believe.
Thank you.
And I just noticed, by the way, Janet Kirshner, yes, thank you, Janet. Yes, it was, now I remember, yes, Williams, one of his goals was, of course, as a missionary, was to convert. And of course, he, but what that has to do with the dictionary, I really don't know. He wrote actually two dictionaries. One was the Sanskrit English, and the other one was the English to Sanskrit dictionary. And I think that was enough to give him the position at Oxford, which Max Muller wanted, but lost out.
No, yeah, she did not criticize him because of the dictionary, but because he was criticizing Buddhism.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Richard Mason. What prompted the inclusion of Sanskrit terms in the 1894 edition, but not in the 1890 edition?
Oh, no, I'm giving the wrong impression. I have not seen the 1890 edition. So I don't know. For all I know is that the Sanskrit terms may have been in all editions, but it's not, there was no policy to exclude Sanskrit terms. It just meant that now for the first time, there was an editorial board consisting of members who had the knowledge to suggest that these terms be included in the dictionary. And as a result, that's what happened. They got in, whether or not the judge was around in 1890, I'm not sure. It's hard enough to get the 1894 and 1898 editions. I don't know about the 1890, whether that's available.
But Jim, do you think it's fair to say that they included Sanskrit terms because philosophers were on the board of the dictionary, or would it have happened anyway, or what do you think?
I think, I don't know what the circumstances were in including it, but it would appear to me that the people who were involved with publishing that dictionary were very open to the suggestions of those who were on the editorial board. So in other words, I don't think there would have been any objection to leaving out or omitting any term from any language if they thought it was important in portraying how English is spoken in the United States and elsewhere. So I think the editors, the general editors, were very open to including foreign terms. This is something that I don't believe either out of ignorance or out of ideology, previous dictionaries did not include these terms. But I don't know beyond that what happened. I know that the editors were open, however, to allowing these terms in.
Definitely an important historical find, I think, to demonstrate this. So any other questions or comments for Jim? Okay, let's give Jim a hand and a reaction on stream. Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
So this really ties up our second day of the Theosophical History Conference. So I think it has been a very fruitful and constructive day where we have touched upon the Theosophical movement and globalism in many different ways and in many different parts of the world. So we are continuing on this venture, you could say, and tomorrow is another day where we will explore this topic further, and it's going to be at the same time, 5 o'clock GMT. So thank you everyone for a great second day of the conference.
Thank you. Good night.